Welcome everyone, I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast on WION on Trump's Muslim ban. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll talk about the impacts U.S. President Donald Trump's new immigration policy has. It's now gotten completely chaotic with lots of confusion at airports across America. This after a 90-day ban that bans people from these 7 Muslim-majority countries after an executive order: Iraq, Iran, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Libya and Somalia. We're going to be joined by a panel of experts as well as our correspondents to give us a deeper perspective into this issue and this development that has impacts not just in the U.S. but around the world. But before we get to the experts, let's talk a little bit about the background, the stories that are unfolding right now. On Saturday, hundreds of protesters gathered at airports across the U.S. to demonstrate against President Donald Trump. Anxious travelers waited inside the airports. Confusion and chaos followed as immigration and customs officials struggled to interpret the new rules. Some legal residents who were in the air when the order was issued were also detained upon arrival, while holders of green cards also had to wait for hours to be allowed. The order was stalled late Saturday when a federal judge in the U.S. said stranded travelers could stay in any country that they were in. Protesters then gathered at New York's JFK airport to protest against Trump's new policy to ban the entry of people from these 7 Muslim countries that we earlier mentioned.
Is American and the Iran relation is affected already, but we are people, we are not the government. We are not doing nothing. If the government doing something wrong with this government, we are not responsible, American and Iranian. What they can do. Why I have to be punished for somebody else's problem? I don't know what I have to do. We run away from the Iranian country. They do something like this, but we didn't know we're going to have the same situation here. I'm a U.S. citizen about 15, 20 years old, yes.
I feel a little bit, I'm sad. That's it. I want to say I'm sad. I don't know what happened, who's on Iran, but I feel sad, that's it.
We decided to come down here to protest the unconstitutional executive orders put out by President Trump yesterday, banning people from the United States based only on their nationality and really their religion, which is un-American, unconstitutional, and in violation of the Immigration Act of 1965.
I think the ban on Muslims is completely anti-American, and it's opposed to everything true Americans stand for. It's unconstitutional, it's mean, it's heartless, and we're here to say we support immigration into the U.S. and we especially support the people who are stuck in the airport and have every right to be here.
Well, reactions poured in from around the world with world leaders talking about the new U.S. immigration policy. British Prime Minister Theresa May says, quote, "We do not agree with this kind of approach and it is not one we'll be taking. We are studying this new executive order to see what it means and what the legal effects are, and in particular, what the consequences are for UK nationals." Turkey's Prime Minister Binali Yildirim also says that the ban was no solution to the refugee crisis. He added that Western countries must do more to help ease Turkey's refugee burden. While Iraqi's government have also declined to further comment on the issue, lawmakers have requested the parliament, though, to take up the matter. Iraq is among the 7 countries whose citizens have been banned by Trump, according to the new immigration policy. Well, in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's new immigration policy, Iran said it was blocking entry of American citizens into its territory. Iran said the executive order banning people from 7 Muslim countries was insulting. A statement from the foreign ministry says, quote, "The order will go down in history as a big gift to extremists and their supporters." U.S. President Donald Trump has banned the entry of people from 7 Muslim countries, including Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Somalia, from entering the U.S. under a new immigration policy. We have a panel of guests now to discuss this story, and we're going to cut into them throughout this newscast. Let's first introduce our guests for this broadcast. We'll start with our correspondent who's joining us, our West Asia Bureau Chief. Thank you so much for joining us, Anshul Vora. We also have Dr. Wael Awad, a writer and political analyst, who is here in the studio, as well as Jonathan Landy, a national security correspondent for Thomson Reuters, the West Asia area. So thank you guys so much for joining. Let's first start with our guest here in the studio, Dr. Vayal Avad. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on this. Let's talk about the refugee situation, the issue with what Trump's new immigration bans mean, specifically when it comes to Syria. He wants to reduce the number of refugees allowed in the U.S. by half. And this restriction, one of these 7 countries being Syria, certainly impacting that. How is it going to be before and going forward?
Well, I think he's been ill-informed. He doesn't know exactly the history of the region. He knows very well that it was his previous administration who created this chaos in the Middle East, and it was behind all this, the 7 nations. In fact, 2007, Wesley Clark himself, the general of the Army Staff of the U.S., he said himself that we were told that to topple 7 countries and regime change policy. So if these are the millions of refugees, it's because of the wrongdoing of the United States. He picked up the wrong person. If you wanted to deal with, if you want to catch the snake, you catch it from the head. You don't catch it from the tail. So you deal with the country which is sponsoring terrorism rather than you going for a country which is a victim of your own terrorism in our state. So Syria have suffered at the hand of the West and the East. They have everybody. We have more than 5.5 million outside the country. We have more than 6 million internally displaced. Half of the country is totally destroyed. And now the United States president is saying this. I think this is he's trying to satisfy his own constituency. He will not be able to carry on with his job. He is creating an American spring like what they have created in the Arab world.
Let's now get our perspective from Jonathan Landy, who's joining us from Thomson Reuters. Jonathan, thanks so much for your insight. Talk to us about specifically when it comes to refugees. We heard about Turkey talking about that as well. The world must do more to make sure that they address the refugee crisis. We know that Germany, for instance, has done its part, its share, and somewhat there has been some criticism on Merkel's part. Is what Trump, his decision, is there any validity in what's going on there?
The fact is that the president has all of the legal authority he needs to do what he has done. He has extremely broad authority when it comes to granting visas and setting the ceiling on refugee admissions. That said, the way that this was done was rife with incompetence, was rife with failure to consult with the departments who are responsible for carrying out the orders. It's largely the Department of Homeland Security and agencies within, like Customs and Border. He had an outside advisor. Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani says that he was involved in drafting what a lot of legal experts say is an executive order that's absolutely rife, as I said, with incompetence and holes. And we've seen the American Civil Liberties Union taking advantage of those holes to obtain stays in a number of places. It's not just one federal judge who has issued orders staying one part of this executive order, and that is the fact that it has been interpreted by, or the Trump White House has ordered these bans applied to legal permanent residents, so-called green card holders who found themselves detained at American airports. Yesterday, we've had reports of American citizens as young as 18 months old and newborn being detained. These are legal citizens. These are not green card holders. And in that regard, the Department of Homeland Security, which was not consulted until the very, very end of the process that resulted in the drafting of this executive order, after they did their legal analysis, told the White House reportedly that the order was not valid when it came to green card holders. They were reportedly overruled by President Trump's chief of staff, Mr. Bannon, and his policy director, Stephen Miller. And so you've seen some federal judges come down on the side of the migrants, saying that they should be allowed into the country. We're going to see more chaos today. There are more protests planned at airports, and in fact, there's one planned in front of the White House later this afternoon. And the fact is that that there didn't seem to be any interpretation or analysis done by the White House on some of the more stringent ramifications of this beyond the migrants. For instance, if you're a dual national.
Right, we're going to come back to you in just a moment, but now we're going to go check in with our West Asia Bureau Chief, Anshul Vora. You've traveled that area extensively, Anshul, many of those countries there that are on this list. I understand, this is certainly something that is upsetting, troubling to many of those people in that country as well, who are just sort of stunned, if I can put it accurately, by this executive order that's now feeling the repercussions. What's the chatter and mood like there?
Well, when Trump came to power, and even before that, I'd been talking to a lot of these, the diplomats, a lot of these countries, and they were circumspect, but they didn't quite know what Trump is going to do. They thought maybe this would be all election rhetoric, and he's not going to, in Iran's case, for instance, really rework the deal or really go ahead and ban the Muslims from entering. So there is a certain amount of, how shall I put it, they're disappointed, but they're also shocked at the same time. A lot of these countries have thought this was just his rhetoric to win the elections, and then he would be advised rightly by his people, by his advisors, and Trump is not going to go ahead and take any such decision. But he has. So they're shocked, they're disappointed. You've already informed our viewers that Iran has said that they won't let any Americans come in. Though it's a different story that Americans in very few numbers go to Iran, if at all. America does not even have an embassy in Iran. And with other countries, if you look at Sudan or Syria, to get a visa to the US was anyways a very difficult and complex process. America is not letting in as many refugees as several other countries are, certainly not as many as Germany, certainly not as many as several Middle Eastern countries. Most of the refugees are still living in the Middle Eastern countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. So there is shock, there is disappointment, and they're hoping that perhaps it's going to be only for these 3 months, as Trump says, and then better sense in the Trump administration would prevail.
All right, Anshul, thank you so much for your perspective. Again, a 90-day temporary ban for these 7 Muslim-majority countries. Let's now continue bringing you more perspective with regards to this. The United Nations Refugee Agency and International Organization for Migration spoke out against Trump's order. They urged the U.S. administration to let the asylum seekers to come into the U.S. France and Germany, as we just talked about, also voicing their concerns over the issue.
We think refugees, asylum seekers, migrants of all kinds should never be defined by their nationality or their religion or their gender or their sexual preference. I mean, we understand there are issues involved with what's happening in some of these countries, but historically, danger does not come from refugees.
Et puis la suite, c'est quoi? C'est de rester dans le cadre des Nations Unies. C'est de retourner le plus vite possible à Genève. Donc la date du 8 était envisagée, mais apparemment les conditions ne sont pas encore réunies. Il faudra que tout le monde soit autour de la table. Régime, opposition, et toute l'opposition, pour sincèrement, dans le cadre de la déclaration de Genève de 2012, dans le cadre de la résolution 2254 du Conseil de sécurité qui fixe les conditions de la transition, s'engage une vraie négociation pour une transition politique.
Meanwhile, far-right protesters came to the streets in Sydney in support of President Donald Trump. Taking the lead from Trump, an anti-Islamic group rallied at Martin Place demanding a ban on Muslim migration to Australia, setting repercussions to the land down under. The rally came just within 24 hours after Trump signed that executive order that barred travelers from those 7 Muslim-majority countries from entering the U.S. Australia has been a strong U.S. ally. It's also been on alert for attacks by homegrown Islamist radicals since 2014. Let's now get perspective back from Jonathan as well as Dr. Avad here. Jonathan, other countries now sort of taking the lead. We see some criticism against Trump, but we just heard about Australia sort of taking Trump's ban and using it for their own advantage, if you would like to call it, to sort of put a ban on their country, sort of the global ramifications on what Trump is now doing with this ban. What do we know about this? Could other countries follow suit, both either adding restrictions or the U.S. perhaps even adding more countries to its banned list of people coming in?
Well, you're already seeing, for instance, Iran has declared that it's not going to allow any Americans in. And on the face of it, that doesn't sound too serious, except when you consider the tens of thousands of Iranians who live here in the United States, both immigrants from Iran, legal immigrants from Iran, and Iranian Americans who were born here. You have the Parliament of Iraq now discussing a ban on visas for Americans, including contractors and journalists. And there's no doubt that there's going to be serious political harm done to alliances. You've seen it's been a week. Last week was a week in which we already started seeing a crisis created by Trump in American-Mexican relations. There are now tensions, I think, with Canada, whose prime minister has criticized the ban. I think you're going to see other allies coming out against it. One of the things we haven't seen here in the United States, however, is mass condemnation of what's going on by members of Mr. Trump's Republican Party. There have been several, but yesterday during the demonstrations at the airports, you had Democratic members of Congress going out to these demonstrations to show solidarity and also to try and get legal representation admitted into the airports for legal migrants or green card holders who are stuck. There are also other... Sorry?
Right. Continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, you also have other ramifications. The question is, so the Trump administration insists that this is not a ban on Muslims, but the fact is that both President Trump, while he was candidate Trump, talked about a Muslim ban. There are exceptions made for religious minorities in this executive order, and religious minorities being non-Muslims from Muslim-majority countries. So a lot of people are seeing this as a ban on Muslims. That could have serious ramifications on American counterterrorism operations. For instance, in Syria, you have about 500 U.S. special forces in Syria fighting against the Islamic State with the help of Syrian Arab partners, mostly Muslims, also Muslim Kurds. What's going to happen to those relationships? Are those people who are helping keep American soldiers alive and fighting on behalf of the United States going to continue to do so in the face of what they will undoubtedly see as a ban on Muslims? I could say the same about Iraq, where there are thousands of American troops working with the Iraqi military and intelligence services to fight the Islamic State. Afghanistan, where you have thousands of American advisors still and special forces working with Afghan Muslim special forces to fight Islamic State and the Taliban. The other question, of course, is how come other countries, there are many ironies here. One of them is that Saudi Arabia, where the bulk of the 9/11 hijackers came from, is not on the list, and where coincidentally Mr. Trump has had business interests. The list of 7 countries was taken from legislation that was signed by President Obama, Mr. Trump's successor, restricting visas and making it harder for people from these 7 countries to get into the United States because they wanted to submit them to more excruciating vetting. That vetting now takes about 2 years. One of the interesting things is there's an indefinite ban on the immigration or the admission of Syrian refugees. Since it's interesting, since 2011, when the uprising against the Bashar al-Assad government erupted in Syria, there have been about 18,000, I think, Syrian refugees admitted to the United States, and not a single one has been involved in a violent incident.
We're going to come back to you on that thought in just a minute, but speaking of that, let's go back to this next story with regards to what's happening in West Asia. Refugees there in that part of the world have expressed their disappointment with the new executive order. Many refugees who wanted to go to the United States to start a new life, the American dream, are saddened by this decision. They said that their dreams are now shattered. Civil rights groups have also condemned the measures as discrimination. They said it would strand refugees in dangerous places and that would tarnish the reputation of the U.S. that is typically known as a land welcoming immigrants.
احنا بنوجه له رسالة كشعب أعزل بعيد عن الإرهاب، بعيد عن الحرب، بعيد عن كل المشاكل هاي، إنه إحنا ناس حابين نعيش بأمان وسلام. ما إحنا داخلين على أمريكا نعمل عمليات إرهابية. وإحنا ضد الإرهاب. وديننا دين الإسلام هو دين سلام بالدرجة الأولى، مش دين إرهاب ولا دين قتل.
All right, let's get perspective now from Dr. Vailavad, who's joining us with regards to what's going on. Brought up a very good point there. Saudi Arabia certainly on the limelight when it came to the 9/11 hijackers, not on that list of 7 countries, but Syria certainly was. What do we make of that decision by Trump to pick these 7 Muslim majority countries? And could there also be more countries added to that list going forward, preventing more migrants from coming in?
That's what I was saying. I mean, the states which sponsor terrorism, you do not touch it. So you didn't catch the snake from the head.
Right.
That's the point. The point is also should be made here that, you know, if you take the history of incidents in the United States since 2001 till 2016, you will see that there is only 123 incidents related to Muslim people in the United States, where we have 3.5 to 3.6 million people, which mean 1 equal to 1 per 100,000 person American are a Muslim. So if there was no incidents and there were only 123 people died out of 54 incidents, and you can see that there were 240,000 American killed by non-Muslim. So you are creating actually an Islamophobia for a reason that you just wanted to please your own constituency. There is no law that you can go and ban immigrants, because the people, you may have the right in your own country to do so. That's your own choice. But when you have yourself created the mess, why you cannot continue with the same policy? So my question comes here is, when you sponsor terrorism, he himself, Trump, he was saying that IS was created by the United States, ISI and Pakistan and the Saudis, they created Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. They did the instability to this region. For God's sake, then why are you banning them? I think the measure here should be taken by the United States policy toward the Muslim country is to show more transparency and non-interference in the regime change, as he has promised that he will not go for a regime change policy. I think Trump will be having this 4 months ban. He might change. He will not include more country in this, because it's impossible to stop the people. We did not have a single Syrian. I can challenge anybody who can say from 1975 till date that he had a single incident in the United States and created a chaos. Now, why he is targeting? I think the question he is trying to say here from the American point of view, that there are infiltrators among the refugees who are from the Al-Qaeda, who are from the IS. He is right. That's happening in the European country. In America, it did not happen, because they promised 18,000 refugees of Syria. They have only taken 14 people. They have not taken the 16,000 people as he promised, Obama. So why to talk of a refugees crisis? You create your own crisis, right, while the whole crisis of the refugees is the neighboring countries.
We're going to come back to you in just a moment, but continuing with more reaction that's pouring in with regards to the new U.S. immigration policy. Trump's decision has evoked strong reactions from the head of tech giants, including Google CEO Sundar Pichai, who said he was upset about the impact of this order. He said the move impacted nearly 200 of Google's employees. In a company-wide email, he asked them to return to the U.S. In the mail, he says, quote, "It's painful to see the personal cost of this executive order on our colleagues. We've always made our view on immigration issues known publicly and will continue to do so." Also getting reaction from giant Twitter that's now reacted to this. The company is talking about this, tweeting out, of course, the social media giant saying tweet in a response saying, "Twitter is built by immigrants of all religions. We stand for and are with them always." Meanwhile, Apple also taking a stand on this. Apple CEO Tim Cook sent an email to his employees saying Trump's order was not a policy they supported, adding the company has reached out to the White House to explain the negative impact on its employees. Microsoft's president as well, Brad Smith, said 76 of its employees were citizens of the 7 Muslim countries, and they were directly affected by the new order. Facebook also reacting to the new policy, saying it was concerned about the order and its voiced support for immigrants. So let's now get perspective from our guests. Let's go to Jonathan. Jonathan, let's talk about Pakistan. Pakistan certainly being in the news in 2016. Why is Pakistan not on that list of the 7 countries that Trump has banned? Is this a question of stopping terrorism, or is it a question of Islamophobia? Your thoughts when it comes to Pakistan?
Well, again, and this is something to correct one of the many misconceptions and total lack of accurate facts that your last guest has mouthed on this broadcast. The fact is that those 7 countries were not plucked out of thin air. As I said, those 7 countries were listed in legislation that President Obama signed, putting visa restrictions on people coming from those countries, not barring them, but putting restrictions on and subjecting them to much stronger vetting. The fact that the United States created the Islamic State is complete and total nonsense, and he cited President Trump as saying that during the campaign, which was strictly for political purposes by candidate Trump. But let's talk about Pakistan.
You're talking about president elected. That's a president elected himself saying these words. I'm not quoting him.
We'll give you a chance to respond real quick, but we are running out of time. So let's get your thoughts on Pakistan. We'll hear from you in a moment, Dr. Awad. So let's go. Your thoughts on Pakistan.
Pakistan was not on that list of 7 countries that was in the legislation. There are many people here in the United States, experts, who believe that it should be on that list because there have been Pakistani immigrants who have been involved in terrorist activities here in the United States. We had the attack out in California, for instance. But the fact is that Pakistanis have killed more Americans, for instance, in Afghanistan, than anyone from any refugees or immigrants who have landed in this country from the 7 countries. There was a lot of questioning about why Pakistan is not on that list, and we're going to have to wait and see whether or not the objections to the fact that Pakistan wasn't on that list, whether or not that's going to have an impact.
All right, and let's get some final thoughts with Dr. Awad regards to that. Talk about Pakistan specifically. Why do you think Pakistan is not on that list?
Well, because Americans have interest in Afghanistan for some time. They are using Pakistan as they have done during Al-Qaeda time. I'm not quoting anybody. I'm not a researcher that I have to dig a lot in the American archive. But you can see Joe Biden himself said that we created IS, we created with Turkey, with Saudi Arabia, with Emirates, with Qatar. We wanted to double regime change. He said it. I didn't say. So even John Kerry, he said it in a talk with the Syrian opposition. He said that we let our IS grow in our own eyes because we wanted to change the regime. So I'm not saying against anybody. I'm not trying to accuse anybody. I'm just quoting what the Americans have said. If American president himself is denying what he has already committed, that's a fine thing. I think what we need to see here is that we needed to see an American policy toward the region of non-intervention in the Arab world. There are more than 85 countries that have invaded. Give me one of the countries that have a democracy in this. So this refugee is a wrongdoing of the American policy.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Awad, and as well to our Reuters guest joining us from Washington, Dr. Jonathan Landy. We appreciate your time. And that does certainly wrap it up for this heated discussion. Lots to discuss about, but we are unfortunately out of time. But we do know that a federal judge in the U.S. has, at this point, granted emergency stay with regards to Trump's new immigration order after that chaos and confusion sparked out at many airports across the United States. With that, it is a wrap. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for watching this special broadcast. We'll see you soon.